You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
Disgraced filmmaker Noah Granger seeks redemption by documenting the restoration of a cursed 1920s theater in a dying town. Inside, he uncovers reels of film marked offerings, footage that doesn't show movies but real audiences being possessed, mutilated and consumed by a sinister force. As the line between film and reality dissolves, Noah discovers the Bellwether Theater is a vessel for an ancient cinematic god, Noxalux, who feeds on repetition, narrative and audience. With Halloween reopening night approaching and a final reel yet to be completed, Noah must choose: finish the film and doom the world, or become part of it forever. If you love psychological horror, cursed films and stories that crawl under your skin and stay there, hit subscribe. At Soul Studios, we don't just tell stories, we summon them. The road snaked through miles of dense, lifeless forest before opening onto the outskirts of Ashmere. Noah gripped the steering wheel tightly as he navigated past a faded sign that read, "Welcome to Ashmere," the paint peeling and barely visible through creeping vines. Beside him, Callie peered out her window at the dilapidated houses that appeared one by one, their windows dark and hollow. A haze hung in the late afternoon air, a mix of mist and chimney smoke that carried the scent of damp rot and something burnt. In the distance, a murder of crows lifted from the tree line, startled into flight by the arrival of the car. "This place, it's even more run down than I remember," Noah said under his breath. His voice tried to sound casual, but there was an undercurrent of unease. He slowed the car as they passed the old lumber mill on the edge of town. Its giant saw blades rusted in place, the building's roof half caved in. Callie brushed a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, her eyes tracking a silhouette of a person who stood motionless on a porch. "Are you sure anyone still lives here?" she asked softly. The figure on the porch, an elderly woman, stared at them as they drove by, her gaze unnervingly blank. Callie shivered and turned her attention back to Noah. "It feels like a ghost town," Noah sighed. "Population's dropped, that's for sure. Ashmere used to have a few thousand people when I was a kid. After the mine closed, well, you can see what happened." He gestured at the boarded-up storefronts they passed along Main Street. A general store with a missing door. A gas station whose pumps were gone, leaving only broken concrete islands. Ashmere looked like a town that time had abandoned, left to decay quietly in the shadows of the woods. They continued in silence for a moment. Noah's knuckles whitened on the wheel as he navigated around potholes that scarred the road. Callie studied his face, illuminated intermittently by the failing daylight. She recognized the mix of determination and anxiety in his expression. It was the same look he had when he first told her about this trip. The furrowed brow, the clenched jaw, the distant eyes that hinted at some grand plan he hadn't fully explained. "Noah," she began cautiously, "I know this theater meant a lot to your family, but arriving here now, I just have a bad feeling." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slowed the car in front of a crumbling brick building. It had once been a charming bed and breakfast. Now its sign dangled by one hook swaying in the cold breeze. "We'll stay here tonight," Noah said, forcing a smile. "Mr. Ansell said he'd leave the keys under the mat for us. He's one of the few still around." Noah parked and cut the engine. The sudden silence was profound. Callie realized she hadn't heard any other cars or the usual sounds of civilization since they arrived. No distant lawnmowers, no children playing, not even a dog barking. Just the wind and the cawing of crows in the distance. They stepped out of the car. The air was colder than she expected, and she drew her coat tighter. The house loomed before them, windows dark and lifeless. Callie felt a pang of pity. At one time, families must have vacationed here to enjoy the fresh mountain air. Now it seemed as forsaken as the rest of Ashmere. Noah retrieved a small brass key from under the threadbare welcome mat, and they entered. Inside, the smell of mildew was strong. The foyer light flickered when he flipped the switch, casting long shadows across dusty floral wallpaper. As they carried their bags upstairs to a modest room, Callie broke the silence again. "You never really told me why the theatre closed in the first place," she said, "or why your Uncle Raymond left it to you after all these years." Noah paused at the door of their room, then pushed it open. It was sparse but clean enough, a bed with an iron frame, a wardrobe, a writing desk. He set their suitcase down and finally answered, "It closed after a fire, back in the late 70s. No one died, but it scared people off. Uncle Raymond kept it shut ever since. He was eccentric, I guess. Loved that old place, but never tried to reopen it." Callie sat on the edge of the bed, springs creaking beneath her. "Eccentric enough to will it to you out of the blue." A wry smile tugged at Noah's lips. "He knew I loved film. He probably thought I'd restore the Bellwether to its former glory, make it a real theatre again." Noah reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter. This came with the will. He handed it to Callie. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting spidery. She skimmed the contents. Raymond's apologetic tone for not being in touch, a cryptic line about stories waiting for an ending, and an urging for Noah to come back to Ashmere to take up the mantle. "What does that mean, waiting for an ending?" Callie asked, looking up. Noah shook his head. "I'm not sure. Uncle Ray was always telling strange stories when I was a kid, local legends, ghost tales, that sort of thing. He probably meant it metaphorically, like there's unfinished business at the theatre. Maybe literally an unfinished film or something." His eyes lit up a bit at that idea. Callie frowned. "If this is about some old movie, Noah." Callie wasn't convinced, but said nothing. She turned off the lamp, and they lay down in the dark, both staring up at the ceiling. Noah's mind churned with anticipation about what they might find in the Bellwether Theater. Callie, however, found herself straining to hear any more noises in the night, her uneasy feeling growing stronger. Outside, the wind picked up again, and somewhere in Ashmere, an old loose shutter banged repetitively, like a warning call echoing into the hollow night. He raised his hands in preemptive surrender. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Tomorrow we'll go to the theatre, take a look around. Maybe it's just a charming old building with a leaky roof. We'll decide what to do after we see it, okay?" Callie exhaled slowly and nodded. She could see his excitement building beneath his effort to stay calm. "All right, tomorrow then." As they prepared for bed, a distant sound drifted through the silence, a faint flutter or flapping, like a curtain caught in a breeze, or perhaps a loose sheet of metal clanging. Callie paused, hand on the light switch. "Did you hear that?" Noah listened, the hair on his arms standing on end, though he couldn't say why. The sound had already faded. "Just the wind," he offered quietly. "This house is old, it's settling." Morning brought a pale, cold sun that did little to lift the gloom over Ashmere. After a quick, quiet breakfast of instant coffee and stale pastries left in the inn's kitchen, Noah and Callie set out on foot toward the Bellwether Theater. It stood near the end of Main Street, its once bright marquee now dark. As they approached, Callie could make out the faint outline of letters on the marquee board. Bellwether in a curling vintage font, and below it, the tattered remains of posters behind cracked glass frames. A faded image of a laughing actress in 1940s attire peeled away from one poster, her eyes long since bleached white by the sun. The theatre building itself was a testament to bygone opulence. Carved stone cornices topped the facade, and a grand arched entrance was bordered by dusty gold-painted columns. But neglect had left its mark. Ivy snaked up the walls, paint blistered and flaked off in scales, and one of the double front doors hung slightly ajar as if inviting them inside, or warning them away. Noah paused before the entrance. He reverently ran a hand over the door's wood, tracing the ornamental carvings. "I used to peek in here when I was little," he murmured. "Back then, it was just an intriguing old building my uncle never opened. I always wondered what it looked like inside." Callie stepped through the propped door cautiously. The lobby was dark save for the weak morning light filtering through dusty stained glass panels above the entrance. She coughed as she disturbed a veil of dust. Inside, the air was colder than outside and carried a smell of aged velvet, mould, and something bitter like old ashes. She fumbled for a light switch along the wall. When she found it and flicked it on, surprisingly, a few wall sconces flickered to life. Dim golden light revealed a once lavish lobby. A chandelier hung overhead, many of its bulbs dead, but a few twinkled faintly, illuminating motes of dust swirling. The floor was a checkerboard of marble tiles, grimy and cracked. To the left was a ticket counter with a tarnished brass cash register still in place. To the right, a velvet curtain partially covered the entrance to the auditorium. Noah let out a low whistle as he stepped in behind her. Wow, it's like walking into a time capsule. He walked over to a framed poster on the wall. It advertised a film called The Eternal Masquerade in bold letters. The date at the bottom was 1978. "This must have been the last show before the fire," he said, tapping the glass gently. Callie noticed black char along the baseboards and up one wall near the auditorium door, the fire's scars. She brushed her hand against the burn marks thoughtfully. "It doesn't look too bad. I expected the whole place to be blackened." Noah shrugged. Maybe they caught it in time, or maybe it wasn't an accident. Small-town rumours, you know. They exchanged a glance. Noah's uncle had never specified how the fire started. The official story was an electrical fault. But standing here, Callie felt a niggling doubt. The burn pattern looked odd, as if the fire had ignited in a single spot and burned straight up, almost deliberately, rather than spreading outward as one would expect. Shaking off the thought, she followed Noah through the velvet curtain and into the auditorium. Rows of seats faced a grand stage where a tattered silver screen hung like a shroud. Half the seats were broken or rotting, and the ornate ceiling above was water-stained, its once cherubim fresco faded into ghosts. Noah's footsteps echoed as he walked down the aisle. "This place could be beautiful again," he said, voice hushed in the vast emptiness. "Can you imagine it packed with people, dressed up for a night at the movies? The projector whirring, the smell of popcorn." Callie managed a small smile at his enthusiasm. It must have been something, back in the day. She could almost picture it too, for a moment, golden light flooding the aisles, a lively crowd. But the mental image flickered away, leaving only the reality of decay. Toward the back of the auditorium, Callie noticed the projector room, a small windowed booth up above the seats. The glass of its little viewing window was dark. "Shall we see what's up there?" she suggested, nodding towards it. Noah's eyes followed hers. Definitely. They found a narrow staircase at the side of the auditorium leading up. Each step groaned loudly under their weight. At the top, a heavy door marked "Private" in flaking paint guarded the projection booth. It took both of them to shove it open against years of disuse. Inside, the booth was cramped and musty. An old projector stood dominating the center. A massive cast iron and brass contraption on wheels pointed toward the little viewing window. Shelves along the walls held metal canisters, film reels, large and small, neatly labelled in Uncle Raymond's meticulous handwriting. Noah's face lit up as he surveyed the room. This must be the archive of all the films the Bellwether showed, and maybe some it never got to. He picked up one canister. "Newsreel, July 1978, he read aloud. He set it aside and examined another. "Bellwether Classics, Nosferatu," he grinned. Uncle Ray collected old prints of classics, of course he did. Callie, however, felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. The projection booth had a single small vent opening behind them. She swore she felt a draught of cold air from it, as if someone had opened a door to winter outside. But when she glanced at the vent, it was shut, just a spider-webbed grate with nothing beyond but the brick wall of the neighbouring building. She rubbed her arms, suddenly chilled. As Noah carefully tried the projector's crank, causing the machine to squeal in protest, Callie's gaze wandered to a desk in the corner. On it lay an open ledger, its pages yellow. She approached and saw rows of dates, film titles, and notes written in an elegant old-fashioned script. "Noah, look at this," she said. He joined her, peering over her shoulder. The ledger listed the theatre's schedule from decades ago. The last entry read, October 12th, 1978. The Eternal Masquerade, cancelled after first reel. Next to it, in red ink, were the words, "Never finish, it must not end." Collie tapped that line. Cancelled after the first reel, why would they cancel a film mid-showing? Noah looked as puzzled as she was. Maybe that's when the fire happened, but Uncle Raymond told me the fire was at night, after closing, if the show was cancelled earlier. They exchanged uneasy looks. It was a small mystery, but it unsettled them. Noah flipped back a page and found a note scribbled in the margin of an earlier entry. "Never finish, it must not end." He frowned, reading it aloud. "Never finish, it must not end. What do you think that means?" Cully felt the hairs on her arms stand up. The phrase sent a chill through her, though she couldn't say why. It felt like a warning. Could it be about the movie? The Eternal Masquerade? Maybe they didn't want to finish the screening? Or someone didn't want them to finish it, Noah muttered. His fingers traced the red-inked words. Despite the ominous tone, she could see a spark in his eyes, the gleam of curiosity. To him this was an intriguing puzzle tied to his love of film. Callie, however, felt a growing sense of dread. She stepped away from the ledger and crossed her arms. "This is weird, Noah. Maybe we should just take some photos, lock up and figure this out later. I mean, it's probably nothing, but..." Before she could finish, a loud thump echoed from somewhere in the theatre below, the sound of something heavy falling. Both of them startled. "What was that?" Callie whispered, her heart leaping. Noah held a finger to his lips, listening. The theatre settled into silence again. Then a faint skittering noise, like feet scrambling across the wooden stage. "Maybe an animal got in," Noah suggested, though his voice was uncertain. Ashmere was quiet, but it wasn't beyond reason that raccoons or stray cats roamed these old buildings. He motioned for Callie to follow as he left the projection booth. They descended the stairs slowly. At the bottom, Noah pushed aside the heavy velvet curtain to peer toward the stage. At first, everything looked as they left it. Empty seats, gloom, the pale outline of the stage in morning light. Then Callie saw it. One of the seat backs near the front was moving. No, not the seat back. Something was behind it. A figure huddled in the second row, obscured by shadows. It looked small, perhaps a child, facing the screen. Noah saw it too. "Hello," he called gently, stepping into the aisle. His voice echoed. "Is someone there?" The figure did not move or respond. Callie felt a surge of anxiety. It was so dark in here she could barely make out any features, but if it was a child, what were they doing here alone? Noah took a few cautious steps down the aisle. The boards creaked underfoot. Callie followed close behind, grabbing his sleeve. "Careful," she murmured. They inched closer. The shape was definitely a person, small-framed, sitting unnaturally still. Noah took out his phone to use its flashlight, raising it slightly to cast some light without being too harsh. In the thin beam, they saw a young boy, perhaps 8 years old, in outdated clothes, suspenders and a newsboy cap, as if he had stepped out of a 1930s photograph. His skin was ashen, and he was staring straight ahead at the blank screen, unblinking. Callie's throat tightened. Something was very wrong. "Hey, kid, are you okay?" she asked softly. The boy moved then, jerkily, as if roused from a deep dream. He turned his head towards them, eyes wide and reflecting the phone's light in an animal-like glint. His face was gaunt, cheeks sunken. Noah lowered the light, not to startle him. "It's all right," he said in a calm tone one might use with a spooked animal. "We're not going to hurt you. How did you get in here?" The boy's mouth opened, but no sound came. Then he lifted an arm slowly and pointed up, toward the projector booth. Noah and Callie exchanged a confused glance. "Up there?" Noah asked. "Are your parents here? Did someone bring you?" The boy's hand remained raised, trembling slightly as he pointed insistently to the booth. Callie couldn't help but follow the direction with her eyes. Through the small window of the booth, nothing but darkness stared back. When they looked for the boy again, the seat was empty. Callie blinked, heart pounding. The boy had vanished in the split second they glanced away. There hadn't been any sound of footsteps or a scurry. He was just gone. Noah rushed forward to the row of seats, shining his phone light frantically. "Hello? Where did you go?" His beam danced over empty, moth-eaten cushions and collected dust. There was no sign anyone had been there at all. Even the layer of dust on the armrest looked undisturbed. Collie stood frozen, trying to process. She had seen him, hadn't she? A boy in old-fashioned clothes. She hadn't imagined those hollow eyes. Noah swallowed hard. "He must have run off. Maybe another exit," he said, though doubt laced his voice. "There's no way a child ran out without us hearing," Callie whispered. Her hands were shaking, so she clenched them. "Noah, what did we just see?" He didn't answer. stepping up onto the stage to inspect behind it, shining light into the wings. Nothing. The theatre was empty except for them. Finally, Noah turned back to her, the phone light illuminating his face from below. He looked pale. I don't know, but maybe we should take a break. He attempted a reassuring smile that faltered. We've been breathing in a lot of dust and... Callie knew what he was implying. Dust and darkness playing tricks on their senses. But she wasn't at all sure that boy was a hallucination. They had both seen him. Still, she nodded, willing to leave the disturbing encounter behind for now. Yeah, let's get some fresh air. They hurried out of the auditorium, back through the lobby and into the daylight. Callie inhaled deeply, as if she had been underwater and only now surfaced. The street was empty as before, and the town silent. She glanced over at Noah. He was staring at his hands, which were trembling just a little. He caught her eye and quickly shoved them into his jacket pockets. We can go through the rest of it later, he said, trying to sound confident. It's probably just a local kid sneaking in. Maybe he lives around here and plays in the theatre sometimes. Callie didn't challenge his explanation out loud, but the pit in her stomach remained. The child's old clothes, his silence, the way he disappeared. It wasn't normal. But she could see Noah was rattled and trying hard to rationalize. Maybe, she allowed quietly. She touched his arm. How about we find somewhere in town to warm up? I saw a diner sign, if it's still open. Noah nodded quickly. Good idea. Together, they walked away from the Bellwether Theater. Behind them, the dark entrance gaped, and for a moment, Callie imagined someone standing in the shadows just beyond the threshold watching them leave. She didn't dare look back to check, and hurried her steps to catch up to Noah, leaving the silent theatre behind, at least for now. The diner, one of the few businesses still open in Ashmere, was a tiny establishment called Dot's Diner. Over cups of lukewarm coffee, Noah and Callie sat in a corner booth discussing what to do next. Outside the window, the afternoon light was fading into a dull grey. Callie cradled her mug in both hands, seeking its warmth. Noah, I think we should report what we saw. That boy. Maybe one of the locals knows him, or, I don't know, call the police. Noah stared into his coffee. The encounter in the theatre still weighed on him, but he was struggling to fit it into any rational box. Report what exactly? That we saw a kid who vanished into thin air, he replied quietly. If we had something concrete. She bit her lip. I know how it sounds, but what if he was real and in trouble? He looked. She trailed off, recalling the boy's hollow eyes and antique clothes. Not quite human, she thought but didn't say. Noah reached across the table and took her hand gently. If he's real, we'll find him again. I'll ask Mr. Ansell later if any kids live around here, but I also keep thinking about that ledger note. His eyes were alight with that mix of fear and curiosity. Never finish. It must not end. And the film, The Eternal Masquerade. Something strange happened back then, Cal. Maybe it's all connected. Callie frowned. She knew that tone. Noah's instinct to dig into a mystery was taking over, potentially at the cost of caution. Connected how? You think the boy, came from the film? Noah chuckled nervously. Sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but what if there's something about that movie? It was the last thing shown. Uncle Ray wrote those warnings. Maybe he saw something during that screening that spooked him enough to stop it and shutter the place. She looked at him, concern in her eyes. And you want to find out what it was? It wasn't really a question. She could see the resolve forming in his expression. He squeezed her hand. Not alone, and not if you truly want to leave, but I feel like we owe it to Uncle Ray to understand what happened. And if there's any danger, knowing is better than not, right? Callie breathed out slowly. Part of her wanted to demand they get back in the car and drive until Ashmere was just a bad memory. But another part, the part that saw Noah's earnest desire and remembered that ghostly boy, agreed that if something was wrong in that theatre, perhaps they should bring it to light. Okay, she said softly. One reel. We watch the first reel of The Eternal Masquerade, see if there's anything to this. But if things get weird, promise me we stop and reassess. Deal. Noah replied, relief evident in his voice. He finished his coffee quickly, as if afraid she might change her mind. By early evening, they returned to the Bellwether Theater, this time armed with a flashlight, some basic tools, and a thermos of fresh coffee. The streets were empty, and a chill mist had descended, clinging to the ground. Inside the theatre lobby, the lights they had turned on earlier were still faintly glowing. The gloom of dusk seeped through the door behind them as they made their way to the projection booth again. Each creak of the old building seemed amplified in the stillness. In the projection booth, Noah located the reels labelled The Eternal Masquerade. There were 4 canisters in total, numbered 1 through 4. The 5th reel, if there was one, was nowhere to be seen. He assumed the movie might have only been 4 reels long, typical for a feature of that era. He placed the first reel on the projector. The machine was an old hand-crank model that luckily also had an electrical lamp hookup. After some tinkering, Noah managed to power the lamp from the theatre's electrical supply, which miraculously still carried a current. The bulb glowed weakly at first, then steadied, casting light through the film. Callie, standing by the projection booth window, looked down to the screen. "Do we need audio?" she asked. "If this print has sound, it would be optical," Noah said, pointing to a small device on the projector. "I'm not sure if this projector's audio system still works, but let's see what we get. A silent viewing is better than nothing." He threaded the film through the sprockets carefully, the old training from his film school days kicking in. His fingers trembled slightly with excitement or nerves, he wasn't sure which. Callie made her way down to the auditorium seating, ostensibly to watch the screen, but also because she felt uneasy being in the cramped booth. She settled in a seat about halfway back, where some cushions weren't completely ruined, and pulled her coat tighter around herself. The auditorium was vast and dark, except for the slice of projector light now shining above from the booth. Noah gave a thumbs up from the window. "Ready?" She nodded, though he probably couldn't see her clearly. "Go ahead." With a clatter and a whir, the reel began to spin. The projector's light beamed out, and the screen below came alive with flickering imagery. At first, only scratches and dust danced, the film leader counting down. Then words in an ornate font, "Noxalux presents," briefly flashed. Callie narrowed her eyes. The word was odd, but she filed it away to ask Noah later. The title card followed, The Eternal Masquerade. The letters were elegant, against an illustration of an antique mask half lifted from a face. The opening scene began, black and white footage of an opulent ballroom filled with dancers in masquerade masks and lavish period clothing. A lush waltz played faintly. The projector's audio output must still have some life, as music crackled from speakers high in the corners, distorted but recognizable. Callie watched as the camera panned across the ballroom. Despite the scratchy, worn condition of the film, the cinematography was impressive, almost dreamlike. Figures twirled and laughed in silence. The distant music too warbled to carry their voices. There was something hypnotic about it. In the projection booth, Noah leaned forward, mesmerized. He noted the production company name Noxalux Presents. Noxalux, it sounded like Latin. Perhaps nightlight or light of the night. It struck him as unusual, but the visuals commanded his focus. On screen, the scene followed a young woman in a flowing gown who stepped away from the dance, lifting a mask from her face to reveal wide, curious eyes. The actress was striking, her features sharp in the monochrome lighting. She moved as if searching for someone among the sea of masked revelers. The camera perspective changed, a subtle shift that made Noah frown. The angle was odd, as if a second camera was filming from behind a curtain, watching the woman. It gave the impression that someone unseen was stalking her through the party. Carly felt a faint unease as the masked dancers swirled. The film's audio popped and hissed, a few frames skipped. She glanced over her shoulder instinctively, feeling as if someone were behind her in the dark auditorium. Of course, no one was there, only rows of empty seats and darkness. Back on screen, the young woman approached a man in a black mask, standing at the edge of the dance floor. He wore a tuxedo that was just a bit out of fashion for the apparent 1920s setting, almost old-fashioned even for then. The way he loomed motionless while others danced gave Callie a chill. He was facing the camera, or rather facing the woman, but his mask had an exaggerated, grotesque smile painted on it. When the woman spoke to him, words appearing in a brief subtitle, "Have you seen my brother?" Since the audio cut out momentarily, the masked man simply tilted his head. Then, slowly, he lifted a hand to point across the room. The woman turned to follow his gesture. The camera panned to a staircase at the side of the ballroom. Atop the stairs stood a small boy in a child's suit, his face half hidden behind a cherub mask. He was eerily still amid the lively ball. Callie's breath caught. A child at the top of the stairs, the hairs on her arm rose again. The boy in the film wore different clothes than the one they'd seen in the theatre, but something about his size and stillness was disturbingly familiar. On screen, the young woman called out to the child, another subtitle, "Peter, why are you up? You should be in bed." The boy turned and disappeared into the dark upstairs hallway, ignoring her. The woman in the film ascended the grand staircase, following after the boy. The music of the ball faded as she left the hall and entered a corridor lit by flickering candelabras. The film's shadows here were deep, and the grain of the aged film stock made them writhe and dance. The camera followed over the woman's shoulder as she moved down the corridor. Each door she passed was closed, but from behind one there came a muffled sound, a thump or a whisper, impossible to tell in the deteriorated audio. Suddenly the projector flickered heavily. The image jittered. Down in the auditorium, one of the remaining light bulbs in a wall sconce burst with a pop. Callie flinched, glancing to the side. The darkness in the corners of the room seemed to creep closer, the only illumination now from the screen and the weak overheads. On screen, the woman paused, as if hearing something behind her. The camera angle had shifted again to that strange perspective, as though someone was right behind her, reaching. The film quality degraded further. Scratches and darkness nearly obscured the scene. A shape, possibly a hand, seemed to appear in the black behind the woman's shoulder. Then the screen went white. The film flapped loudly on the reel. The end of the first reel had slipped off and was slapping against the projector. Noah cursed under his breath and quickly stopped the machine, turning off the lamp. In the sudden darkness, the auditorium felt cavernous and alive with echoing silence. He hurried with a flashlight down to the auditorium to check on Callie. She stood from her seat as he approached. Her face looked paler than before, eyes reflecting the little beam of his flashlight. "That startled me," she said with a shaky laugh, referring to the bulb that burst. "Did the reel end?" "Yeah, I guess the auto switch didn't trigger," Noah said, slightly breathless. "It should have started the next reel. I'll have to do it manually." They gathered at the foot of the stage, near the glow of Noah's flashlight. The theatre was quiet again, and far colder than before. Noah realized a cold sweat clung to his back. Despite the uneventfulness of the reel, he felt uneasy. The images were lodged in his mind. The masked man with a grin, the boy on the stairs, the phrase "Noxalux presents." Callie wrapped her arms around herself. That was unnerving. Even without anything overtly scary happening, I felt on edge the whole time. She looked towards the dark projection booth window. The way it was shot, almost like someone else was in the scene. Noah nodded. I noticed that. The second camera angle. He exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. It's a well-made film, technically, but something's off. It's like it wants you to feel like you're being watched. He shivered, recalling the sensation of leaning toward the projector's window and feeling as if something was watching him from behind. They stood in silence for a moment. The first reel hadn't given any clear answers, only more questions. Callie looked up at Noah. "Do you want to keep going?" The note said they cancelled after the first reel. Maybe they saw something alarming and stopped. Noah bit his lip. His heart wanted to charge ahead and watch the next reel, but he fought down that urge. Callie was clearly unnerved, and truth be told, so was he. "Maybe we should call it for tonight," he said softly. "It's already dark. We can come back in daylight for the next reel. We should process what we saw." Relief washed over Callie's face. "I think that's a good idea." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you." He managed a small smile. "Let's get back to the inn. I'll lock up here." As Noah went to power down the projector fully and ensure the front door was secured, Callie stepped outside first. Night had settled over Ashmere, and a thin fog cloaked the street. The cold air was a welcome relief against her anxiety-flushed cheeks. She inhaled, trying to shake off the strange spell the film had cast. From behind her, Noah emerged and locked the theatre's door with the key his uncle had given him. The click of the lock echoed. For a moment, Noah's eyes lingered on the carved door and the silent marquee above. Part of him indeed wanted to go right back and watch the next reel, but he knew the wise choice was to take a breather. Something about the film seemed to affect them, and the last thing he wanted was to frighten Callie further or to lose his own nerve. They began walking back toward the inn, footsteps muffled on the empty sidewalk. As they passed under a flickering street lamp, Callie said, "That company name at the beginning, Noxalux. Have you heard of it before?" It didn't sound familiar. Noah shook his head, brow furrowed. "No, I haven't, and I thought I knew most studios from that era, even the obscure ones. It could have been a vanity name for a one-off production, maybe related to the content. Nox is night in Latin, lux is light, nightlight, or light of the night." She gave a thin, uneasy smile. "Nightlight, like for children? Somehow I don't think this was a bedtime story." He chuckled softly. "No, definitely not." After a pause, he added, "I'll do some research when we get back. Maybe Uncle Ray left some notes about this, or I can find something in his things at the theatre office." Callie nodded. "All right, but let's not stay up too late. We both need rest. Today's been a lot." They approached the inn. It stood quiet and dark except for a single lamp in the foyer. Inside, as they crept up the stairs to their room, everything was still. The other rooms seemed unoccupied. Perhaps they were the only guests. In their room, Noah pulled out his uncle's letter again and a small notebook he had brought. He started jotting down details, the note in the ledger, the imagery from the film, the word Noxalux. Callie, exhausted, changed into pajamas and sat on the bed, watching him from under the quilt. "You know, for all the strangeness, I was impressed by the film's quality," she said quietly, as if a loud voice might conjure something. "It was beautiful and eerie." "Same," Noah replied without looking up from scribbling. "I wonder who the director was. There weren't any credits yet on the first reel. Maybe at the end or on the next ones." Callie lay down, curling up. "I just hope tonight I don't dream of that ballroom or that little boy," she murmured. Noah set the notebook aside and joined her on the bed, stroking her hair. "If you do, wake me up, okay?" She nodded against his chest. For a while, they lay together in silence. Noah stared at the fissures in the plaster ceiling, mind churning. In his gut, he felt they were stepping into something far bigger than an old film. But he also felt a strange destiny in it, as if Uncle Raymond had guided him here for this very reason. Soon, Callie's breathing evened, and she fell into a restless sleep. Noah remained awake a while longer. Just as he was finally drifting off, he heard ever so faintly, far away, the echo of a single piano key, as if from an old, distant record or an antique piano, a note hanging in the air for just a second. It might have been his half-dreaming mind. He held his breath, listening. Nothing followed but the quiet hum of the inn's heater. Noah closed his eyes and let sleep take him, the image of a white mask with a grotesque painted grin following him down into dark dreams. Sunlight in Ashmere was a thin and colourless thing, but it managed to break through the morning fog as Noah and Callie sat at a small table near the inn's front window. Mr. Ansell, the innkeeper, had offered to cook them a simple breakfast. Now he shuffled about behind a worn counter that served as a reception desk and kitchen pass-through. Callie toyed with her fork, pushing around the scrambled eggs on her plate more than eating them. She hadn't slept well. Her dreams were a jumble of masked faces and endless hallways. Across from her, Noah sipped his coffee, eyes shadowed from his own fitful rest, but he had his notebook out and was rereading what he wrote the night before. Finally, mustering her resolve, Callie spoke up to Mr. Ansell as he came over to refill their coffees. "Excuse me, Mr. Ansell," she began gently. "Can I ask you something?" The old man glanced between them, his pale blue eyes wary but polite. "Sure, young lady. What's on your mind?" Noah set his notebook down, as curious about the answer as Callie was. "We were wondering about the Bellwether Theater," Callie continued. "Noah's inherited it, you know. We went to look around yesterday." At the mention of the theatre, Mr. Ansell's hand trembled slightly, spilling a few drops of coffee onto the table. He hurriedly wiped them with a rag, avoiding their eyes. "The old Bellwether, eh? I heard Raymond's nephew was coming. Should have guessed it was you two I let in last night." Noah offered a friendly smile. "Yeah, Uncle Ray wanted me to have it. We found some interesting old things inside. Actually, we thought we saw a child in there, a little boy." He studied the innkeeper's reaction. Mr. Ansell's weathered face seemed to tighten, the lines deepening. He clutched the coffee pot to steady himself. "A child? In the theatre?" Callie nodded. "We tried to speak to him, but he ran off. Or disappeared, I guess. Are there any kids in town who might sneak in there?" Mr. Ansell shook his head slowly. No children here. Haven't been for years. Most families left when the jobs did. The only folks left are old-timers like me. And trust me, none of us are keen on poking around that theatre." He glanced toward the window where the roof of the Bellwether was just visible down the street. "Why's that?" Noah pressed gently. "Is it just the fire that scared people?" The innkeeper sighed and set the pot down on their table, resigning himself to the conversation. He pulled out a chair and sat with them, lowering his voice. "You saw it with your own eyes, didn't you? Strange things. That fire, it was just the final straw. People were spooked by more than that." Callie leaned in. "What happened, Mr. Ansell? We found a note in the projectionist's ledger that seemed to suggest something was wrong with the movie being shown." Mr. Ansell's gaze flickered to Noah's notebook. "Raymond wrote that, I reckon. He wouldn't ever tell me straight out, but I can piece together some. See, I was at that showing in '78. I was a young man then. The whole town turned up for a free premiere of a movie none of us had heard of, promised as a special treat. Raymond arranged it, some film canisters that came in from who knows where. He was excited, I remember, said it was a one-of-a-kind film event." He swallowed, the memories clearly uncomfortable. Place was packed. Movie started off real nice, fancy costumes, music, but then folks started feeling uneasy. Myself, I recall suddenly getting the worst headache. Others said they felt sick or angry for no reason, and there was a boy. He drummed his fingers on the table anxiously. My brother's kid, Timothy, was there. He started screaming about a man in the back row trying to grab him, but when we looked, no one was in that seat. Noah and Callie exchanged a tense glance. "Raymond stopped the film," Ansell continued, voice hushed. "Cut it off right then and there. Lights came up, and we all stumbled out, confused and scared. Then that night, after everyone left, a fire broke out in the projector room. Ray said it was electrical, but some whispered that he started it on purpose to destroy the film. I never asked. The theatre never opened again." Callie felt a chill as goosebumps prickled her arms. "And Timothy, your brother's kid? He was all right after that?" Mr. Ansell's eyes grew wet. "Timothy, he was never the same. He'd wake up screaming for months. Said he saw the man in his room at night, that the man's face wasn't right under his mask. My brother took him out of Ashmere to live with an aunt in the city, hoping distance would help. But Timothy..." The old man looked down. "He took his own life when he was 20, never could shake what he saw." Noah felt a heaviness settle in his stomach. This was worse than he imagined. Real lives affected, possibly destroyed by that film. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. Mr. Ansell wiped his eyes briskly. "After that night, people left in droves over the years. Some who stayed, well, let's just say nightmares were common. We all tried to forget about that cursed show. Only Ray seemed to keep thinking about it, holing up with his projector and notebooks. I think he became obsessed with whatever was on those reels, but he wouldn't share details, not even with me, his friend." "You think my uncle watched them?" "After that night?" Noah asked. Ansell shrugged. "I suspect he did. How else would he know it had to never finish? Maybe he watched the rest alone, or tried to. But if he did, he never spoke of what he saw, just hinted that the film was evil, that finishing it would unleash something bad. He made me promise I'd never go in that theatre or watch it if I valued my life." Callie placed a hand over her mouth, horrified yet also validated in her fears. Why didn't he destroy it then, if he thought it was evil? "I asked him that myself once," Ansell replied, voice barely above a whisper. "Ray said it couldn't be destroyed, that the film itself resisted. I know how crazy that sounds. He did burn the second reel in the fire, I think. At least it was badly charred when I helped him clean up. But the rest he sealed away. Said it was safer to keep it hidden than to have it loose in the world." Noah ran a hand through his hair, trying to process. The thought of his gentle, eccentric uncle grappling with this alone all these years, it filled him with sorrow and respect. "Mr. Ansell, last night we only watched the first reel. It was unsettling, yes, but not overtly horrific. Do you know if there was something in the later reels that might be worse? The innkeeper stood slowly, a haunted look on his face. I don't know, son. None of us saw more than a bit of that picture. But if you're wise, you'll do as Raymond did, lock it up and leave it be. Or better yet, get out of Ashmere and never look back. Carly nodded vigorously. I agree. We've seen enough, Noah. Noah fell silent, his eyes on the table. Every rational part of him was screaming to heed the warning. This wasn't just a spooky ghost story. People had been hurt, some gone mad or worse. And yet, part of him, possibly the same part that was influenced by his uncle's unresolved quest, felt a pull, a need to know the full truth, to maybe put an end to it for good. I understand, he finally said quietly. Thank you for telling us, Mr. Ansell. Really, we'll be careful. The innkeeper nodded, took the coffee pot and returned to his duties, though it was clear his mind was elsewhere, lost in that fateful night decades ago. Once he was out of earshot, Callie reached across and touched Noah's wrist. Hey, promise me you'll consider what he said. We don't have to do any more of this. We could contact some authority, maybe a film archive or even a church. This is beyond us. Noah turned his hand to hold hers. He forced a reassuring smile. I know. It's frightening. But if Uncle Ray spent his life keeping this contained, then I owe it to him to see it handled properly. Maybe that means handing it to someone who can safely destroy or archive it so no one else is hurt. Callie searched his face. But part of you wants to watch it, doesn't it? All of it. He opened his mouth to deny it, but he couldn't lie to her. I feel like I have to. Not for the thrill, Cal. I'm scared, trust me. But if we don't understand it, how do we stop it from hurting anyone else? What if someone else finds those reels someday? What if just leaving it alone isn't enough? She withdrew her hand, her face troubled. There's always what-ifs. What if watching it only makes things worse? Noxalux, or whatever it is, clearly wants an audience. Mr. Ansell said finishing it would unleash something. We don't have a clue how to fight that. Noah rubbed his temples. The stress was pounding behind his eyes. Maybe not yet, but we have clues. Uncle's notes might be around. The ledger, maybe diaries. We should look for more of his papers, and maybe that missing reel or whatever's left of it. Callie sighed, standing up to clear their plates. If we do it together. I'm not letting you out of my sight in that theatre. And if anything else unexplainable happens, we stop. We leave and call for help. Promise me, Noah. He stood as well and pulled her into a hug. She was stiff in his arms at first, but then relaxed a fraction. I promise, he whispered. A few hours later, armed with flashlights, gloves, and a determination tempered by fear, they returned to the Bellwether Theater. It was late morning, but clouds had rolled in, making it feel closer to dusk. Inside the lobby, the air felt heavier than before, or perhaps it was their imagination after hearing Ansell's account. They moved through the auditorium, stepping carefully around fallen debris, and headed for a door near the stage that Noah had noticed earlier marked Office. The office was small, with a dusty desk and file cabinets. It smelled of old paper and faintly of smoke. Likely the aftermath of the fire had reached here too. Noah set to rifling through the desk drawers while Callie checked the cabinets. Most files were mundane, invoices for concessions, payroll, old playbills for movie nights. Then, at the back of the bottom drawer, Noah found a leather-bound notebook tied shut with a cord. The cover had no title, but inside the front page was scrawled Raymond Miller, his uncle's name, and the date 1979. I think I found his journal, Noah said, carefully undoing the cord. They sat on the dusty floor together as Noah opened the journal. The pages were filled with Raymond's neat script, occasionally devolving into frantic scribbles. The first entries in early 1979 talked about guilt over disappointing the townsfolk, insurance claims for the fire damage, and hints of nightmares plaguing him. As Noah flipped further, one entry caught their eye, dated May 1979. I dared to watch Reel 2 today, alone in that empty palace of shadows. The things I saw, God forgive me, I had to stop. It felt as if something in the film was looking back at me. I heard whispers though I was alone. Noxalux, the name came to me as if whispered into my ear. I fear I have attracted its gaze. Callie put a hand over her mouth at the name. Noah read on, voice hushed. This entity, Noxalux, is no mere curse of celluloid. It is a god of the in-between, born of flicker and darkness between frames. It feeds on those who watch, on our fear and despair. Each scene draws the viewer in, binds them to the narrative. If the film completes, Noxalux steps through fully into our world, powered by every soul that has given it their attention and dread. Noah turned the page, heart hammering. The next entry was June 1979. I am trapped by duty and terror. If I destroy the film, perhaps that act itself will be the finale it needs. I dare not risk it. Instead, I hide it. Yet it calls to me in dreams, begging for an audience. Sometimes I hear the projector roll on its own in the night. Noxalux knows I am its keeper. I pray it never finds a way out. The final entry in that notebook was short, from 1985. Decades on, it still calls. I grow old and tired. Who will be next to bear this burden? I have sealed the reels in the vault behind the stage wall. If you find this, whoever you are, remember, the story must never be completed. Better an endless tale than a world consumed by its telling. They sat in stunned silence after Noah finished reading. The quiet of the office pressed in around them. Dust motes floated in the beam of the flashlight. Callie felt tears on her cheeks, tears she hadn't realized were falling. "He lived all those years with that hanging over him," she whispered. "Your poor uncle." Noah's hands shook as he closed the journal. The weight of Raymond's words and what they implied was immense. A god of the in-between, feeds on fear. If the film completes, it enters our world, he murmured, trying to wrap his mind around it. It sounded insane. But after what they had seen and heard, he believed every word. His uncle had no reason to fabricate such a horror. Callie wiped her tears, steeling herself. So what do we do? If destroying it might trigger the ending, and finishing it definitely will, keeping it hidden seems like the only way. But now we're here and it's awake again. You said you heard something last night. Noah looked at her sharply. The piano note? It could have been a dream. She held his gaze. Or it could have been Noxalux. You heard what he wrote. Sometimes the projector ran on its own. It knows you're here, Noah. Maybe it thinks you're the next projectionist, the next keeper, or the one to finish the story. He stood up abruptly, pacing the tiny office. Panic and responsibility warred within him. I won't finish it. We won't let it out. But maybe there's a way to stop it for good without giving it what it wants. Callie rose too, catching his arm. Raymond couldn't find one. What makes you think we can? I don't know. Maybe we can't, he admitted, voice strained. But we have one advantage. We know what we're dealing with because of his journal. Uncle Ray had to figure it out alone, slowly. We have his knowledge. Perhaps there's something else in the theatre. A clue, a fail-safe he left. He mentioned a vault behind the stage wall where he sealed the reels. We should check it. Okay, she agreed softly. But Noah, we have to be extremely careful. If what's in those reels can influence us, promise me we won't watch any more of them. At least not until we think it through. Noah hesitated. Curiosity still gnawed at him, but the warnings were stark. All right, we won't watch them yet. Let's see what we find first. They left the office, crossing the creaking stage. Behind the heavy curtain, the backstage area was cluttered with old props and scenery flats. A tall wooden panel painted with an image of a rolling countryside leaned against the back wall. Behind it, they found what Raymond's journal described, a metal door set into the wall, like a safe or vault, secured with a heavy combination lock. It must be where Raymond hid the reels after the fire. Noah knelt and examined the lock. It was old and a bit rusty. He tried a few turns. It felt stiff but movable. Callie shone the flashlight over his shoulder. Do you know the combination? Noah cursed under his breath. No, unless maybe he wrote it down somewhere else. He thought for a moment, then flipped through the journal. No obvious numbers jumped out. Could it be a date? Maybe the date of the screening or the fire? Callie suggested. The ledger said October 12th, 1978 for the screening. Noah tried 10 to 1278 in various orders on the combination wheels. No luck. He tried 1978 and other variations. Still nothing. He sat back. We could try to break it, but that might take tools we don't have, and forcing it might damage whatever's inside if, God forbid, something triggers. Callie bit her lip. There was an upstairs office too, wasn't there? Maybe he kept a note in the projection booth or with the reels. Worth a try. They went back up to the projection booth. The 4 canisters of the Eternal Masquerade still sat where Noah left them. He rummaged around the small space, looking for anything that might contain numbers or codes. As he did, Callie looked warily at the film canisters. In the daylight filtering from the booth's grimy window, they looked innocuous enough, just dull metal tins. Yet knowing what they contained made her feel as if they were ticking bombs. She noticed something. One of the cans, the 4th reel, had a red stain on it, like old dried paint or perhaps blood. She touched it lightly and recoiled. The stain was flaked but unmistakable. Maybe Raymond hurt himself or spilled something when sealing them away. Noah found a slip of paper tucked under the projector base. He unfolded it, a faded note with numbers, 241050. "Think this might be it," he said. They hurried back to the vault door and Noah rotated the combination lock to 241050. There was a satisfying click. He heaved the vault door's handle and it groaned open. Inside were several items. A stack of film canisters, presumably more of the cursed reels or backup copies, a thick book bound in cracked leather and a smaller wooden box. They carefully removed the items. The book was inscribed with Latin on the cover. Noah recognized a word from his uncle's entry, Lux Tenebris Nox, Latin involving light and darkness and night, likely something on occult or cinematic demonology. This could be where Raymond learned about Noxalux. Callie opened the smaller box. Inside, on velvet lining, lay a strange object, a brass film projector lens, intricately engraved with symbols. Alongside it was a note in Raymond's hand, lens of severance, used to break the cycle. Her eyes widened. "Noah, look at this." Before she could explain, a sudden bang echoed in the auditorium, as if a seat had flipped up or someone had slammed a door. They both jumped. Noah grabbed the flashlight and stepped out from behind the curtain to peer into the auditorium. "Hello?" he called, voice echoing. Silence. The beam illuminated row after row of empty seats, ending at the still-closed entrance doors. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the atmosphere felt charged. Callie emerged behind him, the brass lens in one hand and the occult book in the other, pressed protectively to her chest. "Is someone there?" she asked timidly. For a long moment, only the motes of dust moved in the light. They began to breathe easier, wondering if perhaps something they moved backstage had caused a distant object to fall. Then an unmistakable sound froze them, a whisper. It was faint, indecipherable, but clearly human and coming from the darkness of the theatre. It sounded like numerous voices overlapping in a susurrus, as if a crowd were murmuring from far away, or from the very seats before them. Callie felt ice in her veins. She raised the flashlight and swept it across the seats frantically. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice cracking. The light caught only swirling dust and the faded red fabric of chairs, revealing nothing. Still, the whispering continued, growing just a touch louder, yet still impossible to understand. It was like being in an audience before a show, hearing people softly talking, except they could see no one. Noah realized with dread that the sound was exactly that, the murmur of an audience. Perhaps the imprints of that doomed crowd from 1978, or worse, something new being conjured by Noxalux to unnerve them. The cursed theatre was coming alive. He gently took the flashlight from Callie, who was shaking. Steeling himself, he called out, "Leave us alone. We're not afraid of you." It was a bluff, and his wavering voice gave it away. The whispering stopped. The sudden silence felt even heavier. Noah half expected a response or an apparition. He almost wished the boy would appear again, if only so they had one identifiable entity to confront. Instead, a different sound began. From the projection booth above, the unmistakable whir of the projector. The machine was running on its own, gears turning, film flapping. They hadn't rethreaded the film after last night, so the reel was just spinning freely, making a slapping noise. The beam of light shot out from the booth, but unthreaded. It cast no image on the screen. Just a blank, quivering rectangle of white light appeared on stage. Callie clutched Noah's arm. "It's trying to play itself," she whispered. Noah swallowed hard. Clutching the brass lens device tight, he tore his gaze from the glowing screen and dashed up the aisle toward the booth, determined to stop it. Callie followed, unwilling to stay alone in the dark. By the time they reached the projector room, the reel had finished its loose spinning. The projector shut off with a clunk. as if it had never been alive at all. Only the swinging tail of the first reel hung in the projector gate, swaying slightly. Noah yanked the power, ensuring it wouldn't restart. The booth fell quiet. Callie looked at the reels on the shelf. One had fallen to the floor, lid partially open. She went to pick it up carefully and realized it was labeled Reel 5. Her breath caught. "Noah, there's a fifth reel." He turned, shining the flashlight. Sure enough, the canister in her hands had a faded number 5 on it. Uncle Raymond had said all reels stored. Perhaps he had indeed saved all parts of the film, including the finale, even if he feared it. Maybe he had intended to keep it from ever being watched. Cully shut the lid firmly. "We should lock these away again," she said. "Maybe even remove them from here, hide them somewhere safer." Noah looked from the reels to the strange engraved lens in his hand and the occult tome. "We will. But this lens, the note said, used to break the cycle. It sounds like Uncle Ray did find something, maybe a way to sever Noxalux's hold without completing the film." Callie nodded slowly, hope and fear warring on her face. If that's true, it's huge, but likely it's not as simple as it sounds. A low creak from the stage echoed up to them like a single footstep on old wood. They both stiffened. Whatever presence resided in the Bellwether, it was growing more active, as if sensing its guardians were arming themselves. "No more splitting up," Noah said. "Let's gather what we need and get out of here for now. We can study this book and lens in daylight, maybe even outside of Ashmere." Callie agreed wholeheartedly. They took Uncle Raymond's journal, the ancient occult book, and the brass lens, along with the fifth reel canister, not wanting to leave it behind. Noah carefully closed the vault and spun the lock for good measure, sealing the other reels back inside. As they left the theatre, each of them carrying pieces of the mystery, they felt the eyes of the empty building on their backs. The silence as they shut the door was that of a held breath. Ashmere's foggy street never felt so welcoming as it did when they emerged from the darkness of the Bellwether. But even as they walked quickly back toward the inn, the overcast sky like a grey shroud above, Noah couldn't shake the sensation that something unseen trailed behind them. A flicker in the corner of his eye, a brief sound of an extra footstep. When he turned, nothing. Beside him, Callie clung to his arm, her own eyes darting about. Neither spoke it aloud, but both knew, whatever Noxalux was, it was awake now, and it was not going to let them go so easily. Back in their room at the inn, Noah and Callie spread out their findings on the bed. Grey light from the clouded afternoon filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate shadows on the pages of the heavy occult tome. Callie had lit the room's small table lamp as well, more for comfort than illumination. The warm glow fought back the gloom gathering in the corners. Noah carefully turned the brittle pages of the leather-bound book. The text was primarily Latin, interspersed with diagrams and woodcut-like illustrations. Neither of them could read Latin fluently, but some marginal notes in English, likely written by Uncle Raymond, helped interpret key passages. Callie sat next to Noah, the brass lens device in her lap. It was about the size of an apple, heavier than it looked, with intricate symbols etched around the glass. She held it up occasionally, peering through it at the lamp. The light distorted strangely, splitting into a smear of colours. Looking through it made her feel slightly dizzy. "I think this book is some kind of grimoire or guide for dealing with entities," Noah said, squinting at a particularly dense page. Raymond underlined a section here. He ran his finger along a paragraph where an English phrase was penciled, cycle of telling and sacrifice. Callie leaned closer to read. Cycle of telling, like a story cycle? Does it mention Noxalux specifically? Noah flipped a page. An image dominated the sheet. A crude drawing of people sitting in a theatre, all eyes wide in terror, skeletal hands reaching from a screen toward them. Above the image, ornate letters spelled out Noxalux. The depiction was horrifying in its implication, audience members being literally consumed by what they watched. His mouth felt dry as he scanned the caption. "It names Noxalux here," he murmured. Raymond translated some on the side. "An ancient hunger that dwells in stories, thrives on repetition and despair, a god that made itself at home in the age of cinema." Callie closed her eyes for a moment as if wishing this were all just some terrible fiction. But it was all too real. So it wasn't always in film? It could have been in older forms of storytelling? Maybe. Perhaps it's existed as long as people told dark tales. But film, with its vivid reality and mass audiences, was like a feast for it. Raymond wrote that it made itself at home when cinema came around, like it found its perfect vessel. Noah turned another page. There was mention of rituals attempted to appease or bind Noxalux. The text described how certain cult circles believed that by showing or even creating a never-ending story, one that loops or remains unresolved, they could trap the entity, keeping it occupied and contained. But the danger was that if anyone ever concluded the story, Noxalux would be set free to inflict unimaginable suffering on the world, feeding without end. Callie recalled the line, "Better an endless tale than a world consumed by its telling." She whispered it aloud, realizing its grave significance. Noah nodded. That's exactly what Ray wrote. So he tried to keep the tale endless by not finishing the film. The cycle of telling remains incomplete, so Noxalux is stuck in hunger mode, unable to fully manifest. It's cruel in a way, keeping it starving but alive. But the alternative is worse. Carly looked down at the brass lens in her hands. And this, lens of severance, it sounds like it might sever that cycle entirely. Could it, maybe, break the connection between the story and Noxalux itself? Like cutting it off from its food source or its medium? Possibly, Noah said. He searched the book for any mention of the lens or similar artifacts. After several minutes, he found an illustration of a lens or mirror held up by a robed figure in front of a monstrous shape. Next to it, a single word in Latin, separo, and an English scribble, sever, separate the viewer from the viewed. Separate the viewer from the viewed, Noah read. That could mean a way to protect the audience or break its hold on those watching, maybe even sever Noxalux from the film itself. Callie furrowed her brow. If Noxalux is bonded to the film's narrative, using this lens might strip it out or cut the bond. Perhaps it's used during a showing. She gazed through the lens again, turning it slowly. Maybe if you project the film with this lens attached, it changes something, cuts off the energy supply. Noah flipped to the next page. Raymond had written some steps in English, scrawled in haste. Lens must be affixed before the final act. The eye, Noxalux, will rage, resist. Sacrifice likely required, but whose? If successful, film becomes mere film. Noxalux banished until another narrative draws it back. They both read those lines in silence twice. Sacrifice, Callie muttered, a tremor in her voice. There's always a catch. It needs a life, doesn't it? Noah set a hand on her knee instinctively. Maybe not a death. Could be something symbolic. But it might mean someone has to give themselves to distract it while the lens does its work. He didn't say the rest, that it sounded like a one-way trip for whoever that sacrifice was. But the implication hung in the air between them. Callie abruptly stood and went to the window, staring out at the bleak midday street. "This is madness," she said quietly, hugging herself. "We're talking about banishing a god from a cursed film. How is this our life right now?" Noah joined her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry. If I hadn't dragged you here." She shook her head. "No, don't. You didn't know. And I chose to come. I just wish your uncle had burned the place to the ground rather than leave this burden to you." "I do too," he admitted with a heavy sigh. "But we have to deal with what is. At least he left us tools, knowledge. We're not completely helpless." Callie turned to face him, her back against the cool window glass. "I'm scared, Noah. Not just of whatever that thing is, but of what it might do to you. You're already sounding like you feel obligated to do something drastic." Noah looked at her earnestly. "I don't want to do anything dangerous unless we absolutely have to. If there's any chance to secure this film and leave, I'll take it. We could lock everything up and bury it somewhere. But if Noxalux is truly awake and targeting us, it might not let us just walk away now." As if to underscore his words, the lamp on the bedside table flickered, dimmed, then blazed bright for a second before popping, the bulb exploding with a sharp ping. The room plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the grey daylight. They both startled. Callie's nerves were so frayed that the small incident made her breath catch. She exhaled shakily. "It's not even night, and it's starting." Noah retrieved a flashlight from his bag and clicked it on, setting it on the desk to cast light around them. He checked his phone. Of course, no signal out here for internet or emergency calls, and the landline in the hall was long disconnected. "Maybe we should gather our things and leave now," Callie said suddenly, her voice firm in the quiet. "We can take the book, the lens, the reels we have, drive as far as possible. Maybe distance will weaken its influence. Then get a specialist involved, I don't know, paranormal investigators, or even just deposit it with some archive under lock and key." Noah weighed the idea. Running sounded extremely tempting. But would they get far? The paranoia that something would follow, or that they'd be dooming others by abandoning the fight, gnawed at him. "We can try if that's what you want," he said gently. "Your safety is most important to me." Callie looked at him with relief and surprise. "Really? You'd leave with me now?" He managed a small smile. "We got what we needed, the knowledge, the tools. If our gut says staying will get us killed or worse, then yeah, we should go." Some tension lifted from her face. "Then let's do it. Now, before nightfall." They moved in hurried agreement. Noah packed the books and lens carefully in his satchel. Callie grabbed the 5th reel canister they'd taken. The others were still locked at the theatre. She hesitated, then also took Uncle Raymond's journal. It could be a useful reference, and if nothing else, she felt it belonged with Noah. Within minutes, they were downstairs and checking out with a perplexed Mr. Ansell. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, concerned. "You two look shaken. Are you all right?" "We just realized this project is too much for us," Noah explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "We might come back with some experts, but for now, best we go." Ansell studied their faces and then nodded slowly, as if he understood there was more unsaid. "I won't try to stop you. I hope you find peace from whatever you found." He handed Noah a small slip of paper. "My number, in case you ever need to talk. And thank you for hearing me out this morning." Noah clasped the old man's hand briefly. "Thank you. Take care." They stepped out into the afternoon, which was waning into a prematurely dark evening under heavy clouds. The wind had picked up, rattling dead leaves along the gutters. Ashmere seemed emptier than ever, as if the few souls who remained had retreated indoors, sensing a coming storm. Callie loaded their bags into the car while Noah double-checked that they had everything. The key turned in the ignition, and the engine of their sedan sputtered to life. Both of them let out a breath of relief as Noah pulled away from the curb. As they drove down Main Street, Callie kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her heart still pounding. The Bellwether Theater's dark facade slipped by on their right, its blank marquee watching them like a dead eye. They passed the Welcome to Ashmere sign and continued on to the narrow road that led back through the forest. Only then did Callie truly feel some of the pressure in her chest release. "We're really doing it," she said, half in disbelief. "We're getting out." Noah nodded, but his grip on the wheel was tense. He kept his eyes on the road, which wound through tall pines that swayed in the rising wind. Dusk was falling, making the way ahead dim even with headlights. Mile after mile they drove, silence heavy between them, both lost in their thoughts. Just as the last light of day faded completely, they neared an old stone bridge that arched over a black river, one of the few landmarks marking the edge of Ashmere's town limits. Callie dared a small, hopeful smile. "Once we cross that, we're out of town. Maybe things will feel normal again." But as the car climbed onto the bridge, the engine sputtered. Noah frowned and pressed the gas. The engine coughed and lost power, the car jerking to a halt halfway across the span. No, Noah muttered, turning the key again. The engine cranked but did not catch. The headlights began to dim. "What's happening?" Callie's voice rose in panic. "We just had a full tank and the car was fine minutes ago." Noah's blood ran cold. It felt like more than a mechanical failure. It was as if the car had hit an invisible wall. He tried the ignition once more, pumping the pedal. Nothing but a wheezing click, and then even the dashboard lights went out, leaving them in darkness. The wind howled through the trees around them, and the car rocked slightly. Callie reached for her phone, but there was still no reception, just the no-service message that seemed to mock their attempt to escape. Then, from the forest behind them, there came a glow. Faint at first, it grew brighter, like the pale silver of a projector beam shining through the trees. Noah saw it in the rearview mirror, a column of light on the road where they had come from, flickering as if someone had set up a giant projector in the woods. Cully saw Noah's eyes fixed on the mirror and turned to look through the rear window. What she saw made her choke on a gasp. In the distance, down the road, the fog and darkness were illuminated by that flickering beam. Within it, shapes moved. It looked like figures, shadows cast onto the road and trees. Dozens of them, maybe more, approaching slowly, and accompanying the light was a sound on the wind, the distorted, crackling notes of a waltz, the same tune that had played in the ballroom scene of the Eternal Masquerade. "Oh my God, Noah!" Callie scrambled, locking her door as if that could possibly keep out whatever this was. Noah pounded the steering wheel. "It's not going to let us leave." His voice was a mix of fear and anger. "It's bringing the story out to us." He grabbed the flashlight from the center console and flicked it on, though its beam seemed pitiful against the growing spectral glow behind them. "We have to move on foot." "Into the woods?" Callie cried, staring at him. "Those things are behind us, and who knows what's out there." But the shadows were steadily advancing. Noah could now discern individual forms among the crowd, figures in old-fashioned dress, some in masquerade masks, some with faces pale and blank. The audience, or characters, they were hard to define. And leading them, he thought he saw a tall silhouette, one hand cradling something at hip height and the other extended as if beckoning, perhaps holding a cane or a projector crank. A pang of raw terror nearly froze him, but he steeled himself. He reached under his seat and pulled out a tire iron, a meagre weapon but better than nothing. "We can't stay in the car. Come on." He exited his door, moving around to Callie's side. She was trembling as she got out, clutching her satchel that contained the reel and journal. Noah kept a protective arm around her as they left the road and climbed down a small embankment into the tree line. The forest was immediately dark and disorienting. The flashlight cut through swirling mist and branches. Behind them, on the road, the ghostly procession continued. The waltz grew louder, accompanied now by a cacophony of whispering and distant laughter that did not belong in these woods. They stumbled through underbrush, putting the thickest cluster of trees between themselves and the road. Callie bit back a whimper as the music on the road abruptly stopped, and in its place came voices calling out. It was as if the figures were searching for them. They could hear faint calls. "Noah? Callie?" Spoken in multiple tones, men and women, young and old, all echoing their names as though inviting them to return. Callie clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. The way her name floated on the wind in a dozen discordant voices was almost worse than being chased physically. Noah pressed his back against a thick oak trunk, pulling her with him. His heart thundered in his chest. He thought frantically. If the entity could reach this far, maybe leaving town wasn't an option unless they neutralized it. Perhaps they had to fight here and now in some way, or get back to the theater where at least the means to fight might be stronger. He leaned to Callie's ear, whispering, "We might have to circle back towards town, maybe find another car or go to the church or somewhere protected." She nodded, tears in her eyes, unable to speak. A sudden crunch of leaves nearby made them both stiffen. Noah raised the tire iron and Callie held the flashlight up like a club. From around a tree stepped a person, Mr. Ansell. He was alone, lantern in hand, eyes wide with fear. "Noah, Callie!" he hissed quietly when he spotted them. Thank God. They rushed to him, relief and confusion mingling. "Mr. Ansell, what are you doing out here?" Noah whispered. "I saw the lights from town, heard that awful music. I drove as far as the crossroads, but my truck died too. I came looking for you on foot, figured you'd try the main road." Callie steadied herself on the old man's arm. "We tried to leave, it won't let us." He nodded gravelly. "We have to get back, find shelter. The church has old warding crosses in it, perhaps." His voice trailed off as behind them a new sound erupted. A shrill shriek of rage that cut through the trees. Noah felt it reverberate in his bones. It sounded like no human or animal, a tearing, distorted scream that might have been composed of hundreds of overlapping voices. Ansell's face went ashen. "Run!" he urged, gripping Callie's hand and practically dragging her as he set off back toward Ashmere. Noah followed, adrenaline lending him speed. Behind them, the woods came alive with movement as the pursuers rushed into the trees, their polite calls giving way to feral howls and gibbering laughter. The three dashed through the forest. Brambles clawed at their legs. Once Noah nearly lost the journal from his bag, but he snatched it before it fell. The unnatural pursuit crashed closer. He could swear he heard the clinking of film reels, the flapping of celluloid somewhere among those phantoms. They broke out of the tree line at a back lot of some houses at the edge of Ashmere. Just ahead, the small church stood with its modest steeple, likely the one Ansel meant. Its windows were dark. "This way," Ansel panted, leading them up the steps. The door was thankfully unlocked, and they slipped inside, bolting it behind them. The interior was lit only by what little twilight remained coming through stained glass. It smelled of dust and old wood. Pews stretched forward to a simple altar. Ansel hurriedly made his way to a cabinet near the door, from which he took out a large wooden cross mounted on a staff, perhaps used for processions. He planted it firmly by the entrance, as if that might bar evil from crossing. Noah and Callie slumped into a pew, catching their breath. Outside, the sounds of their pursuers had faded a bit, perhaps thrown off in the dark woods or unwilling to approach the church grounds directly. "What now?" Callie whispered, voice trembling. "We can't run. We can't hide forever. It'll find a way." Noah knew she was right. He shared a look with Ansel. The old man seemed to reach a silent understanding. Ansel spoke, voice low. "Raymond tried to carry this burden alone. Perhaps he shouldn't have. Maybe together we can do what he could not." Noah carefully set the brass lens on the pew, its metal glinting dully in the stained glass light. "We think this can stop it, but it might require someone to be a sacrifice." Ansel drew a shaky breath, but nodded. "If it comes to that, I've lived a long life. I'll not have you youngsters throwing yours away if I can help it." Callie opened her mouth to protest, tears welling again, but Ansel raised a hand kindly. "No argument yet, dear. We first have to get that thing where we can hit it." Noah picked up the lens, feeling the weight of it. "We need to lure Noxalux back into the film, I think. Right now it's reaching out, like spilling over. If we go back to the theatre and start the film, maybe it'll concentrate itself there on trying to complete the narrative rather than chasing us through town." Callie's face was a portrait of dread. "You want to go back inside the Bellwether and play the movie for it?" Noah turned to her, taking both her hands. "I don't want to, but think of it like trapping a wild animal. It's out here now, everywhere we go. But its lair is that film. If we bait it to come to the screen, we might be able to sever it for good with this lens. If we just keep running, we'll end up like Timothy, or worse. It'll hound us to our graves and still be out there for the next victim." She squeezed his hands, anguish clear on her face. "I'm so terrified, Noah." He pulled her into a tight embrace. "Me too," he whispered into her hair. "But I'll be damned if I let it hurt you. We'll finish this together." Ansel coughed gently. "That being the case, we'd best hurry. Evil's patient until it isn't. The theatre is its home turf. I suspect it won't destroy the town until it gets us back within those walls." They gathered themselves. The church had a side door that led out toward a lane near Main Street. Peeking out, they saw no sign of the apparitions for now. Perhaps they lingered at the edge of sacred ground or melted back into shadows to regroup. The trio moved swiftly and quietly through back alleys and across an empty lot until the Bellwether Theater loomed ahead. Its presence was foreboding, but oddly it now felt like a grim refuge. They would face the evil inside on their terms. Noah unlocked the door with shaking hands. As they slipped into the lobby, the darkness within seemed to recognize them. A soft chuckle echoed from somewhere, as if from a spectator waiting for a show to begin. Noah sucked in a breath. "It knows we're here. Let's get in position." He and Ansel headed straight for the auditorium and up to the projection booth once more, while Callie lingered near the auditorium doorway, every instinct telling her to turn and flee, yet she forced herself to stay for Noah. The projector was still prepared with Reel 1 partially threaded. Noah fixed the film properly this time, tightening the loops and ensuring the autofeed was engaged to move from reel to reel. He gingerly took the final reel canister that Callie had carried and loaded it onto the second feed arm, ready to slot in when Reel 4 ended. Now all 5 reels would play in sequence for the first time ever. It felt momentous and dire. Ansel watched him, crossing himself mutely as he realized they intended to run the entire film. "God protect us," he murmured. Before starting, Noah took the brass lens and affixed it in front of the projector's own lens, using some tape and a clamp lying around. It fit awkwardly, clearly not designed for this model projector, but he angled it to cover the beam. Looking through the booth window, the stage was now bathed in a diffused prismatic light from the test beam, as if multiple overlapping frames would project. He hoped this was how it was meant to be used. Collie crept up to the edge of the stage, not wanting to be alone in the dark aisles. She looked back and saw shapes stirring already in the back of the auditorium, figures slipping into seats silently, as if awaiting the show. Some had glowing eyes in the dark, and 1 or 2 pale faces drifted in half-light. She bit back a whimper and climbed onto the stage itself, thinking perhaps to stay near the screen where Noah would focus the lens effect. Noah's voice crackled through an old intercom to a speaker by the stage. "Ready down there?" Collie gave a shaky thumbs up, realizing he probably couldn't see it clearly. She forced her voice to work. "Re-ready." Ansel had opted to stay in the booth with Noah for now, to guard him as he operated the machine. He held the tire iron in one hand and a small silver crucifix from the church in the other. Noah took one last steadying breath and flipped the switch. The projector lamp ignited, and the reels began to turn. Below, the big screen lit up once again with the title card, The Eternal Masquerade. But this time, the image was slightly distorted, fringed with rainbow hues, an effect of the brass lens filtering the light. In the auditorium, an audience had indeed gathered. Callie could see them now by the flicker, rows of figures, some in fine dress, others looking like ordinary townsfolk, all sitting with faces turned upward to the screen. Their eyes did not reflect the light, many wore masks. She recognized the boy from before, seated in the front row, his cherub mask in place. Her throat went dry. They had an audience of apparitions. Souls claimed or lured by Noxalux over the years, perhaps, now summoned for the grand finale. The film played on, resuming beyond the first reel where they had left off. The young woman on screen wandered the dark corridors of the mansion, searching for her brother Peter. As she moved, shadows drifted behind her in the film, unnatural shapes that didn't match the scene. Noxalux was aware of the interference, the lens, because the image would occasionally flare, as if the entity was straining against it. From the seats, a few frustrated hisses and growls rose. The spectres shifted, restless. Callie stood beside the screen, wanting to be close to where the lens influence was strongest. On screen, the woman opened a door to a room and let out a silent scream. The audio track had died entirely now, leaving only the projector's mechanical whir and the murmur of ghosts. The room was filled with figures in black robes, their faces also masked, standing in a circle. In their center, the little boy Peter stood, head bowed. The cultists in the movie slowly turned toward the camera in unison, as if aware of the viewer. Their masks were of various animals, and one wore a featureless mirror mask that caught the light oddly. Suddenly, one of the ghostly audience members leapt up, a man in a bowler hat, and shrieked, "No!" He ran to the aisle, arms outstretched toward the screen, but as he entered the beam of projected light, his form sizzled and burned away with a wail, as though the lens's filter was harmful to him. Callie realized with shock that the lens was acting like a protective barrier. Any of those phantoms trying to interfere physically would be hurt. This gave her a surge of hope. Up in the booth, Noah heard the shriek and saw the brief flash of flame in the aisle. "It's working, so far," he muttered. The film progressed to reel 3 and then 4 without technical hitch, though each passing moment weighed heavy on them all. The movie revealed horrifying things. In flickering glimpses, it became clear that Noxalux was orchestrating events at the masquerade, driving partygoers to madness and violence in a loop of scenes that sometimes repeated with slight differences. One moment, the woman would find her brother safe. The next, the film would flicker and he would be gone again, as if rewinding and altering events. With each loop, her despair grew, narrative repetition fueling the entity's power. Callie felt her own sanity fray watching these scenes echo and distort. More ghost audience members cried out in agony or clutched their heads, reliving their past traumas as the cursed narrative dug into them. Finally, the transition to Reel 5 came. This was it, the final reel that had never been seen by anyone living. Noah's heart pounded. He glanced at Ansel, who was pale and praying under his breath. The screen went dark for a long moment. Then a single scene faded in, the theatre itself. A black and white shot of the Bellwether's auditorium appeared, filmed from the stage, precisely where Callie now stood. In the film, the seats were full of townspeople, all watching themselves. It was utterly meta, a crowd on film staring out at presumably a screen. The camera in the film panned over the crowd, and in that on-screen audience, Noah recognized faces. Mr. Ansel as a young man, Uncle Raymond, others he'd glimpsed in old photos. This was a scene of the very premiere in 1978, somehow captured in the cursed film's final reel, even though it could not have been filmed in reality. It was as if Noxalux had woven the real audience into its narrative, closing the loop, blending story and reality. The on-screen crowd began to scream and run, mirroring what likely happened when the showing was stopped. But then the image warped. The film showed the doors sealing shut by themselves, and a shadow spreading over the screen, a silhouette with impossibly long arms, and a featureless head descending upon the panicked moviegoers. Callie covered her ears as a horrendous sound screeched from the ancient speakers, a mix of the real terrified cries and something like a predatory roar. Even with the protective lens, the power of the final reel was palpable. Noxalux was finally telling its ending, the catastrophe it hungered for. "Noah, get ready," Ansel yelled, seeing the brass lens tremble on its clamp as if pressure bore against it. Noah's hands hovered by the focus knob, unsure what to do but knowing the moment was imminent. According to the plan, at the climax they'd tilt or adjust the lens to sever the connection fully. But would he know the moment? He hoped he'd feel it. In the auditorium, the ghostly audience members were either fleeing or evaporating in the light. Many simply vanished as their likenesses on the film were consumed by the shadow. It seemed Noxalux was devouring its own gathered souls in a final bid for power. On screen, the dark figure now turned away from the carnage of the phantom audience and began walking down the theatre aisle toward the camera, as if coming to claim the real viewers beyond. Callie realized the final reel was essentially breaking the fourth wall entirely. Noxalux was making its move to come through the screen into reality. The image shuddered. The thing on screen, tall and vaguely humanoid, stretched out a hand toward them. The brass lens vibrated violently, starting to loosen. Noah shouted, "Now!" to Ansel. He grabbed the lens device firmly to hold it in place and twisted it sharply. As he did, an unearthly howl erupted from both the speakers and seemingly the air around them. The projected light refracted wildly, splitting into multiple beams, fragmenting the image on screen into broken shards of picture. The figure on screen was torn into several ghostly outlines by the refracted light. It writhed, trying to reassemble, arms and legs jittering in disjointed pieces. Down in front of the screen, Callie covered her eyes as a blast of cold wind swept out from the projection, and with it a cacophony of screams. She sensed forms rushing past her and being sucked back toward the screen, as if the lens had turned the film into a vacuum, drawing the spirits in. She opened her eyes to see dozens of translucent figures flying toward the screen, merging with the fragmented shadow creature, who seemed to be both growing and shredding at once. The whole theatre rattled. One of the projector's bulbs blew out, but Noah kept the second one running. The film itself began to smoulder and burn from the strain, frames disintegrating just after passing the gate, ensuring the image only had one chance to be seen. Noxalux, caught between worlds, was in a tug-of-war of light. It was working, but not fully. The entity was resisting, clinging to both realities. The lens had weakened it, but not destroyed it. In that instant, Noah knew what was needed. Sacrifice likely required. "Stay here and keep it steady," he yelled to Ansel, handing him the projector controls. Before Ansel could object, Noah was sprinting out of the booth, racing down the stairs. "Noah!" Callie screamed as she saw him appear at the side of the stage. The winds died down for a second, revealing him to the presence on screen. The figure of Noxalux, still flickering in broken form, seemed to sense the living soul daring to intervene directly. It reached its shattered arms out through the screen, pressing against the inside as if it were a membrane. Noah climbed up onto the stage, just a few feet from that quivering screen of light and celluloid. He looked back at Callie, eyes full of love and fear. "Whatever happens, don't stop the projector until it's over," he shouted over the din. "I love you, Callie." Her heart broke as she realized what he intended. "No, Noah, don't," she cried, starting toward him, but a sudden force, perhaps Ansel from above or the entity's own barrier, held her back. With resolve etched on his face, Noah turned and faced the screen. The silhouette behind it matched his height now, arms reaching toward him like an embrace of darkness. Steeling himself, Noah stepped forward and into the screen. For a moment he stood half within the projection, his body casting a huge shadow in the beam that mingled with that of Noxalux. Then, in a flash of blinding light, he was gone. Sucked into the image as if pulled into deep water. On the film, a new figure appeared amongst the shards of the entity, Noah himself, rendered in grainy black and white, standing in that phantom theater beside the monster. His face contorted in pain, but also determination. "Noah!" Callie shrieked, dropping to her knees in front of the screen, reaching out to the grayscale image of her husband within. He turned his face toward her just for an instant, and through the crackling speaker she heard his voice echo, strangely calm. "The story ends with me." In the booth, Ansel, tears streaming down his face, kept the lens steady as the final moments played out. On the screen, the dark figure enveloped Noah, its shards converging on him like a swarm of insects. But as it did, the refracted light of the lens seemed to slice through both of them. Noah's silhouette shone brightly, like a human-shaped beacon, pinning the shadow with rays of white. There was one last ungodly roar, and then the film burned white, the projector spitting out the tail of Reel 5 in flames. Ansel killed the lamp and the screen went dark, smoke curling upward from the melting celluloid. Callie sobbed, not caring about anything but the empty stage before her. The ghosts were gone. The seats were empty. Only she and Ansel remained in the silent, ruined theatre. It was over. But Noah. She crawled onto the stage, hands feeling over the screen as if it might become a portal and give him back. The fabric was hot to the touch and smelled of char. "Noah," she moaned, tears blurring her vision. "Please, no." Ansel made his way down, limping slightly, and gently helped Callie to her feet. He guided her off the stage, away from the screen that had taken Noah. She was in shock, her legs barely carrying her. "His sacrifice saved us," Ansel said softly, voice trembling. "He stopped it, Callie. He did it." Callie wanted to scream that she didn't care. She wanted Noah, not the world. But a numbness had overtaken her. She leaned into the old man as the two of them walked out of the Bellwether Theater, leaving the projector still, the last reel a heap of smoking plastic. In the east, dawn's first light was creeping into the night sky. Ashmere was silent. No wind, no whispers. Just the first chirp of a morning bird, unaware of the cosmic battle fought in the dark hours. Months later, on a quiet evening, Callie sat alone in a small apartment living room far from Ashmere. On her lap was Uncle Raymond's journal, open to the final entry which she had practically memorized by now. In her hand was a single frame of film, mounted in a slide, all that was recovered unburnt from the Bellwether's projector after that night. The frame was blackened at the edges, but in it one could make out a figure standing tall and firm against a hazy darkness. Noah's face was faint but present, eyes resolute. The very last frame of the eternal masquerade, she believed, capturing the moment he gave himself to stop Noxalux. Callie had insisted on returning to the theatre once more after sunrise that day, dragging a hesitant Ansel with her. Amidst the ruined reels and ashes, she found that single frame, ejected and fluttering in the projector's metal cage. A miracle, or perhaps a message. She held it up to the light now. The small lamp behind it made the image glow. Her heart ached with both sorrow and a strange peace. Noah had succeeded. The cursed narrative was broken, the film destroyed. Ansel reported that Ashmere's remaining residents felt a weight lifted. Some claimed to remember the night of 1978 more clearly now, as if a fog was gone. Still, at what cost? Callie wiped a tear from her cheek and managed a sad smile. "You always wanted to be part of something cinematic," she whispered to the frame. "Trust you to take it literally, you damn fool." She set the slide down and closed the journal. Next to her on the couch was the brass lens. It was cracked straight through, spent, its power apparently gone. Perhaps it had done the one job it was meant to. On the coffee table lay a neatly bound manuscript. She reached over and ran her fingers on the cover. It was her own work, something she had poured her grief and truth into over the months. A written account of what happened in Ashmere. A story to honour Noah's heroism and Raymond's sacrifice before him. Of course, she doubted she would ever publish it as non-fiction. Who would believe it? But maybe as a novel, a horror tale inspired by true events, it could reach people in another form. If Noxalux ever somehow survived or returned through another story, maybe readers would be more cautious, though she hoped fervently that the entity was truly vanquished. Callie stood and turned on the television, needing some background noise to fill the emptiness of the apartment. As she absently flipped channels, her mind still on her memories, she nearly skipped past a station that seemed to be airing an old movie. Something made her stop. On the screen was a black and white scene in a lavish ballroom. Masked dancers twirled. Callie's blood turned to ice. The title card faded in, The Eternal Masquerade. How? It couldn't be. The film was gone. Heart-pounding, she grabbed the remote, ready to turn it off or change the channel, but her fingers froze. The camera had panned across the dancers and was focusing on a woman in a flowing gown, and then the perspective shifted, that second camera angle behind a curtain, exactly as she remembered from Reel 1. No, she whispered, this isn't real, it can't be. But it continued. The masked man with the grotesque painted grin appeared on the TV, pointing up the stairs to the little boy. The image clarity was surprisingly good, not scratchy like the old print they'd watched. Callie stumbled backward until she hit the wall, eyes glued to the screen in horror. Was she dreaming? Hallucinating from trauma? On the television, the woman ascended the stairs, following the child. But this time, when she reached the dark corridor, she turned directly toward the camera. Her face, once beautiful, appeared hollow-eyed and anguished. She opened her mouth, and though the film was silent, Callie heard a voice emanate from the TV's speakers, clear and haunting. The voice was Noah's. The story ends with me, unless you watch it begin again. Callie's scream caught in her throat. The woman on screen tilted her head, and for a split second, her features seemed to morph into Callie's own face, eyes full of tears. Then the TV screen went black. The apartment was silent, except for Callie's ragged breathing. She fumbled with the remote, turning the TV off completely. Her reflection in the dark screen showed her panic. On the coffee table, the single film frame in its slide had fallen over, or moved. It now lay directly on top of her manuscript pages, as if deliberately placed. She approached it, legs shaking. Lifting the frame, she saw that in the image Noah's face was no longer visible. The figure was just a silhouette now. A cold dread enveloped her. Noah had stopped Noxalux's film from ending in Ashmere. But stories, especially ones people fear, have a way of resurfacing. In a new form, a new medium. Her eyes darted to her manuscript, the story she had written. She thought of the televised scene that should not exist. It was as if the Eternal Masquerade had found a way to leak out, to survive beyond its destruction, perhaps through the very act of her retelling. She realized with dawning terror that by writing it down, by sharing it, she might have invited the hungry god into a new narrative, one that could propagate endlessly in the modern world. Television, books, the internet, so many screens, so many eyes to watch and feed it. Callie sank to the floor, clutching the locket on her neck that held a tiny photo of her and Noah, tears spilling as she mouthed, "I'm sorry." The television, though off, briefly crackled with static. Just a flash, a single frame blipping on it, Noah's face staring out in warning or plea. Then it was gone. She knew what she had to do. With trembling hands, Callie gathered the manuscript and the frame, the journal and the lens. She would destroy them all, burn every page, smash every relic. If Noxalux had hitched a ride on her story, she had to end it here and now, alone, before it reached any audience. As she moved to do so, a faint sound made her pause. It was the soft whirring tick she had come to know too well, the sound of a film reel flapping at its end. It was coming from nowhere and everywhere, echoing in her mind. And underneath it, the distant notes of a piano playing a melancholic waltz. Callie choked back sobs and steeled herself, rushing to the kitchen to grab a lighter and the metal trash bin. Across the city, in a small independent theatre, a projectionist prepping the night's show found an extra canister in the cabinet that he didn't recall seeing before. It was unlabelled. Curious and hoping it might be some vintage gem, he decided to thread a bit of it through his editing viewer. As he cranked the reel, he saw a flicker of a ballroom scene and a title card, The Eternal Masquerade. He frowned, the name unfamiliar. A lost film, perhaps? Excited by the prospect, he set it aside to show his colleagues later. And somewhere in the quiet suburbs, a young horror fan browsing an online forum came across a bizarre, newly uploaded video clip titled Lost Silent Film 1928 Must Watch. He clicked play and watched a jittery black and white scene of a terrified woman in a corridor. There was no sound, but as she mouthed words, subtitles appeared. It must not end. Intrigued and unnerved, he shared the link with a friend, who would share with another, each viewer leaning a little closer to the glow of their screens, heartbeats quickening as the shadows on the film behind the woman began to move. And with each new viewer drawn into the cursed footage, the cycle began to turn once again, unwitting audiences stepping forward one after another to take their place as the next sacrifice in Noxalux's eternal masquerade. The Bellwether Theater may have burned, and its final reel seemingly destroyed, but stories like the Eternal Masquerade don't die, they evolve. Now it lives in whispers, screens and retellings, feeding on the dread of those who dare to look too closely. So next time you feel watched while watching, remember, some films watch you back. The show must go on, whether you survive the ending or not.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week. So if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.